I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I thank the President of the General Assembly for convening the high-level meeting on middle-income countries. Mr. President, you have, in your statement of the 17th of June, very appropriately captured this moment as a rare opportunity to address some of the biggest obstacles to sustainable development in the MICs. In this vein, Sri Lanka welcomes the theme of this meeting, fine-tuning the development system approach to address the needs of the middle-income countries. Mr. President, at the outset, my delegation aligns itself with the statement delivered by the distinguished representative of the Republic of Guinea on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. Allow me to make the following remarks in my national capacity. In Sri Lanka, the pandemic is aggravating economic vulnerabilities post-COVID-19. The economy suffered from a number of recent shocks, and political volatility delayed much-needed reforms. Sri Lanka's public debt in the circumstances has climbed. The economic situation that confronts the middle-income countries, Mr. President, is unique, significant, and impacts 70% of the world's population, as we have heard it before. Therefore, it requires immediate, focused policies and united responses from the global community in addressing the root causes of the challenges they face, including, but not limited to, the debt distress, fiscal deficits, tax avoidance, heavy reliance on the tourism sector, decreasing foreign direct investments, climate change, and other global challenges. The broad classification of the MICs has left the specific needs of individual countries out of the discourse on the subject. As an example, global initiatives like the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative or certain concessional financing having excluded the MICs from accessing crucial forms of financial assistance. COVID-19, Mr. President, is devastating low and middle income countries, adding to their debt burdens and threatening a far-reaching sovereign debt crisis. To help manage debt distress for the countries most exposed, the G20, I say, must extend the policy for a temporary standstill on foreign debt payments to official and private creditors. A standstill entails an agreement among creditors and debtors for a temporary and long pause on debt payments. In some cases, contracts allow a majority of creditors to agree to a standstill over the objections of the minority. In addition, the G20 should call for the establishment of a central coordination mechanism to assist in both implementing a standstill and developing a longer-term sovereign debt strategy to meet the pandemic challenges which continues to plague the MICs. It should make use of recent contractual institutional reforms to maximize creditor participation in this effort. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the International Monetary Fund had projected that the gross public debt, both domestic and external, of low and middle income countries would on an average reach a high of 55.57% of their GDP in 2020. The pandemic has compounded the problem. Countries face staggering new healthcare costs, collapsing tax revenues, tax evasion, and inadequate export revenues due to global recession, and capital flight and frozen debt markets, which leave governments unable to refinance maturing debt. The sudden stop, if I may use that expression, in low and middle income countries is due in part to developments in high income economies, where financing needs have skyrocketed overnight against the background of extreme risk aversion and a flight to safety among investors. Mr. President, the heterogeneous needs and varying economic situations within the MIC group means policies and financial assistance required are not always comparable. They need to be tailored for each country. It would be more helpful, we say, for the MICs to have access to a multi-dimensional approach that takes into account the diversity within the group and enhance their eligibility to receive concessional financing. Mr. President, the context in which we examine the issue is very material. Global conditions must aptly and accurately inform policy and financial mechanisms. I make this observation in the light of the recorded sovereign rating downgrades that occurred during COVID-19 just a few months ago. This widespread trend is significant, I say, because the prospect of losing investment grade ratings leads investors to sell their bonds to acquire more favorable and creditworthy bonds, which pushes up a nation's borrowing costs and ultimately its debt, perpetuating the cycle of inequality. Post-COVID strategies need credit rating agencies to be more flexible and more innovative to apply a situational analysis and a different criterion during global pandemics. Going forward, Mr. President, a global effort must be undertaken to identify and fix the structural inequalities faced by the MICs. The discrepancy between the costs of a bond in some middle-income countries is as high as 12%, while in some OECD countries it is as low as 0.3%. The increased financial constraint on a middle-income country, coupled with decreased eligibility to receive concessional financing, is a significant challenge to the global development goal of equitable conditions. This, we say, is a critical change that needs to be made if we are to close the financing gaps between MICs and high-income countries. Mr. President, Sri Lanka values and is committed to achieving the 2030 agendas. However, considering the current global conditions and economic constraints, the flexibility and the reprioritization of the SDGs may be prudent and not altogether out of place to consider at the current moment in time. To build an inclusive and a forward-looking cooperation for sustainable development, the United Nations Development System needs to evolve its assistance to the MICs. Sri Lanka calls on a joint framework of collaboration with a multilateral development banks to improve synergies, as indicated in the Secretary General's roadmap for financing the 2030 agendas. Finally, let me conclude with a crucial request. In order to build back better and recover from the burden of COVID-19 and the burden that COVID-19 has placed on all of us, including the MICs, efficient and equitable access to vaccinations is an indispensable must. I call on the international community to maximize their efforts to make vaccines a global public good and make it equally available to the global community. Mr. President, Sri Lanka looks forward to a collective effort towards a more inclusive and targeted response addressing the needs of middle-income countries. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka for his statement.